Hello, I'm StormWind Instructor and Cybex author Will Panek. In this video, I wanted to explain and show you how to create a fine-grained password policy. Now, in Windows Server 2003 and before, if you had a domain, you could only have one password policy per domain. What that meant was, when I set up a password policy, that's like the complexity, how many characters, how often the password needs to be changed. That password policy applied to everyone in the domain the same way. No matter if it was IT, sales, executives, everybody had to follow the same policy. Windows Server 2008 came out and Microsoft created fine-grained password policies. Now you have the ability to actually put different password policies on different groups of individuals. So the sales group could have a different password policy than the executives, which could be different from the IT department. So I'm going to show you how to walk through and create a password policy, and then how to assign that policy to a group of users. Now this is a two-step process. First, you have to actually create the password policy within the Active Directory schema. And we're going to do that by using the ADSI Editor tool. Then, after the policy is actually created, we're going to go into Active Directory and I'm going to show you how to assign people to that policy. So let's go ahead and jump right out on our server. Now, I'm using just a normal Windows Server 2012 R2 data center server. It has Active Directory installed with DNS, but nothing special. It's just a normal Windows 2012 R2 server. We're going to start by double-clicking on the ADSI Editor. Now, when the ADSI Editor comes up, by default, you may have all of these actually, you may not have anything shown here. Let me show you what it would look like when you actually first go in for the very first time. When you go in for the very first time, it's going to look just like this. What you need to do is, at that point, you need to right-click on the ADSI Editor and say Connect to. And at that point, you're going to connect to your domain. So at that point, we're going to go ahead and we're going to connect to our domain. All right? Now, here's the configuration container. This is actually going to store all of our different configurations. Now, I also want to go in and I'm going to show you that we're going to connect to the actual default container, which is our default domain controller. So I'm going to click on that one. So you can add multiple parts of Active Directory to the ADSI Editor. The one that we need is we actually need to configure the domain itself. So where it's the domain controller is StormWind AD, that's where we're going to go. So you would do your domain controller. I'm going to expand this and I'm going to go down to System. Now when I expand System, under System, you're going to have an actual password settings container. Now this is where you have to build your password, your fine-grained password policies first. And the way you do that is you just right-click and you say New Object. And at that point, we're going to build our object. It's going to be a password setting object, so we're just going to say Next. Now it's going to ask us, what's the name of this object going to be? So here, I'm going to say this is the executives. So this is going to be the password policy for all of our executives. So I'm going to say Next. At this point, it's going to ask me to put in an actual precedence. Now, what this does is, this is like a cost value. If I'm a user and I belong to multiple groups, and each group has its own password policy, the way it's going to determine which password policy to use for me is by setting this number here. It works just like a cost value. The lower the number, the higher the cost. So for example, if I set a password policy here of 10, and then I have sales policy of 20, and I'm an executive who also belongs to the sales group, the password policy with 10 is going to override the password policy with 20. The lower the number, the more it's going to get used as that group policy. So, since we have our executives here, we want the executive policy to override any other policy, and executives do belong to multiple groups. We're going to set this to 10. Now, you could set it to 1, but normally the cost values go by tens, 10, 20, 30, 40. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to set the cost value here of 10, and I'm going to say next. Then what it's going to ask me is, do I want to store these passwords in reverse encryption? And I do. So I'm going to set this to true, and I'm going to say next. Then it's going to ask me, do I want to have a password history length? Now, your password history is how many passwords Active Directory will remember for a user. So this way they can't use the same password over and over again. So for example, if I put in a password history of 12, they're not going to be able to use any of those 12 passwords until they hit number 13. And number 13, you would then be able to use the first password they used, and so forth. So if I set it where my passwords change once a month, and I set my history for 12, they're not going to be able to reuse one of their passwords until they hit month 13. And the only password they're going to be able to use out of those 12 is the very first one, because again, it remembers 12 in the order that they're done. So 13 can override number 1, 14 can override number 2, and so forth. So we're going to remember 12 passwords for our users. So at that point here, we're just going to go ahead and set it for 12. Then it's going to ask me, do I want to set password complexity? This is uppercase, lowercase, and I'm going to say true. I want password complexity set. Then it's going to say, what is my minimum password length for my users? Now, your minimum password length is how long the minimum the password could be. We're going to set this to 8 characters. Now, be careful on how long you make your password length. It's very hard for people to remember passwords that are 12, 16 characters. And I've seen people do that. Now, if you want to do that, that's fine, but a good, at least minimum you want is an 8-character password. So that's what we're going to set here. We're just going to make it for an 8-character password. So their password is going to be at least be a minimum of 8 characters. And I say 8 characters because since we're using complexity, that means uppercase, lowercase, numbers. So there's going to have to be at least 8 of them. Now it's going to ask me the minimum password age. Now what the minimum password age does is this is basically set how often they can change their password, minimum wise. Normally you want to set this to at least 1 day. You want a password to be at least a minimum of 1 day. If you, let's say we set this to 1 hour, that means every hour a user could change their password. If they do this, trust me, by the end of the day, they're going to forget what password they're on. So you have a maximum password age. That's the longest a password's allowed to be used. Well, a minimum is how long it has to be until you're allowed to let them change it again. So we're going to set this to 1 day. Now here's the thing. All time values are actually done in seconds. Done also in the Microsoft, they actually call it the 18 format. So for 1 day, believe it or not, we got to do a negative sign. And for 1 day, it's going to be 864 with 9 zeros. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Now that right there, believe it or not, is the equivalent to 1 day. Now when you see this, when we open this password policy up afterwards, it'll actually show it as 1 day. It won't show these values. Then it's going to ask me, what's my maximum password age? So for a maximum password age, because these are executives, they've complained about changing their passwords too frequently, we're going to go ahead and allow it for 60 days. So for 60 days, I'm going to set a 60-day time value. So it's going to be 5184. It's going to be followed by 10 zeros. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And again, this is called the 18 format. So if you don't understand how this works, just go out and do a little research on the 18 format, and it'll show you how these times work. Now, it's going to ask me about my lockout threshold. This is how many times will I allow a user to put in a bad password before I lock them out. So I'm going to set this to 3 bad password attempts. Next, it's going to ask me about the observation window screen for your lockout. Now, let me give you a little example of something. Let's say someone comes in the morning on Monday. They put in 2 bad password attempts. I have it set to 3. On the 3rd attempt, they put in their proper password. Now, a timer is going to be run, and it's going to remember the time from when the last 2 bad passwords were put in. If that timer runs out and I log off and log back in, I can then re-enter 3 bad passwords before it locks me out. But let's say I set that timer to 5 minutes. So I put in my 2 bad passwords, then I log in. I realize I need to log off and log back in to reset something. And it's within that 5-minute period. And when I log off and I log back in, I put in another bad password attempt. Because 3 password attempts were done within that 5-minute period, it's going to lock my account out. That's the time value that we're putting in here. How much time is it going to remember for the bad password attempts? So what we're going to do here is we're going to go ahead and we're going to set this for 5 minutes, which equals 3, I need a minus, 3 followed by 9 zeros. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. That actually is going to equate out to 5 minutes. Then it's going to ask me, if they get locked out, how much time am I going to allow to go by before they can reattempt to put in bad passwords again? We're going to set this for the executives for 30 minutes. So if they lock themselves out, they're going to have to wait 30 minutes or call the IT department to try to get back in. So for 30 minutes, it's going to be 18 followed by 9 zeros. -18, and then again 9 zeros. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And again, when I show you this, you'll see that this is actually going to be set to the value when you look at the fields. So we're going to say next. And at that point, believe it or not, we're just going to go ahead and say finished. And that's it. I now have an executive's password policy. Now, when I click on this and I open it up, when I look at the values, you'll see that the values are actually set in the 30-minute, 5-minute. It doesn't show the negatives that I put in. Password expires every 60 days. Minimum password is every day. Minimum password length is 8 characters. So even though I put in those strange 18 format numbers, they equate out to be the time I was looking for. So at this point, we're just going to say okay. And at this point, we can go ahead and we can close the ADSI Editor. Now what we're going to do is we're going to go into Active Directory users and computers. Now, what we need to do is we need to add groups to that password policy. The problem is you can't see the different password policies. To be able to see this, because we need to be able to go into System, Password Policy, same as ADSI, we need to go under View and go to Advanced Features. Now when we open up our Advanced Features, we can see a lot more organizational units, including the System OU. Now if I open that up and scroll down, you're going to see that I have a password container. And inside that password container is the executive's password that I just created. So at this point, we got to make sure that we have our executives group. So let me go to my users here. I don't know if I've actually created an executives group or not. I may have done it one quick search here under New Hampshire. Okay, I didn't. So let's go ahead and create an executives group for our New Hampshire here. So we're going to say new group. and we're just going to name it executives. We're going to make it a global security group. Oh, it already exists, so I did create it someplace. It is here. Oh, look at that. All right, it might be, let's see if I put it under one of my other groups here. All right, let's, it would be easier if I just searched on it, but you know what? It's got to be under my... All right, well, if it's already there, that's all I need to know. So the executives group is already there. So let's go to the password policy. Let's go back to our password container. Go into our executives. And what we're going to do is we're going to right-click and we're going to go into the properties. Now, when we go into the properties of the actual fine-grained password policy, what we're going to do is we're going to click on the attribute editor. And then what you're going to do is you're going to scroll down to where it says MSDS-PSO applies to. Watch. Okay. Let me just make sure. Okay. So, PSO applies to. So it's basically saying this password object applies to who, and it's not set. So I'm going to double click on that. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to say add Windows account. And I'm going to type in executives. I'll say check name. The executives group comes up. And it's as simple as that. When I say OK, it now applies to the executives group. And now the executives group have their own fine-grained password policy. Then all I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my view. I'm going to remove the advanced features so that this way no one sees, if they go into Active Directory, they see more than I want them to see. And it's as simple as that. It's just that simple to actually go through and create a second password policy. Now you can do this for as many groups, many users as you need to do this to. But be careful on how many you do this, because if a lot of people, I would make sure I documented this someplace. Because again, if your other IT people don't know to go under advanced features and go to that actual container for the password policy, they may not realize that you've set up multiple password policies, and they may not understand why different people are getting different reset times, different complexities. So make sure you inform your team and let them know where these password policies are set. So I hope you enjoyed this video on how to set fine-grained password policies in Windows Server 2012 R2. This will also work for Windows Server 2012, 2008, and 2008 R2. I am StormWind Instructor and Cybex author Will Panek, and I hope to see you in one of my classes real soon. Thanks.